Good morning. We are going to fly through some things this morning, so I want to make sure you're prepared, got your fingers ready. I don't normally put Bible verses on the screen, but I have 12 points today compared to my normal 2 or 3. So we're going to really go quick today, and I put the verses on the screen, but I do encourage you to grab a bulletin, fill in the blanks, take notes, do those types of things so that we can have a chance to get through these. So put on your running shoes and be ready to listen to some really fast talking, and let's get ready to go. We've been talking about changing the world and what all we can do to do that. And one of the things that I talked about last week was one of the best ways for us to change the world, change our world. Change the relationships that we enjoy in our world by the way that we act, by the way that we interact with others. And I'm basing these lessons off of one of my favorite books, How to Win Friends and Influence People, because I think the principles in that book really are biblical principles on relationships and how we should treat others and how we should make sure that we are talking to others. Well, last week we talked about techniques in handling people, and this week I want to move on to the next major point, which was how to win people to your way of thinking. And I know that sounds manipulative, and that's not the point. That's not what we're trying to do. If I were to reword it, I would probably reword it as winning people to God's way of thinking. That's what we're trying to do as Christians, right? We want to win people to God's way of thinking. Last week we ended with the point of arousing in others an eager desire to do things, to do what it is that they should be doing. And we looked at several passages from 1 Peter where Peter makes that point, where Peter says that if we live correctly, if we live honorably among the Gentiles, if we live as lights in the world, people will notice that and they will want to have a part of that. One of our memory verses is from the Sermon on the Mount, where Jesus says, "Let your light so shine before men, let it shine in such a way that they may see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven." Again, it's not about getting people to do what we want them to do. It's about living in a way that gives people a desire to have what we have. Such a way, with such joy, with such great relationships, that people see us and recognize there's a difference in that person. One of the Bible class this morning on the book of Judges is that while God's people were specially chosen, given a special hand, and giving a special law to follow their God, ultimately they ended up just looking like all the people around them. They couldn't tell the Israelite different than the Canaanite. Well, sometimes can you tell the Christian different from the non-Christian? The same, act the same, look the same, talk the same, have the same entertainment, the same conversation, the same television we discuss around the water cooler. How are people going to know we're different? There has to be something different about us if we want to arouse in others a desire to have what we have. That's exactly what Peter talked about over in 1 Peter chapter 3. 1 Peter chapter 3, in the very beginning, he's talking to wives who are living with non-believing husbands or unruly husbands, and says, "Submit yourselves to your own husbands, so that even if some disobey the word, they may be won over without a word by the way their wives live when they observe your pure, reverent lives." Do you see that? The way that wife can have the greatest impact on her husband, and I would argue it works the other way too, is that if that believer lives in such a way that that non-believer recognizes they have something special. That's the idea. It's the same thing you read of in the book of Acts with Christians preaching and teaching, and that we should be living in such a way and acting in such a way and be so different that people see us and that makes them want to have what we have. Well, I think there's some ways we can do that. So I've got 12 different things we need to do in order to make that happen, and right around 12 minutes to tell you that. So here we go, all right? First one is this. The way to get the best of an argument is to avoid the argument. And I know that sounds odd, but it is a biblical principle. Do everything without grumbling, or some of your versions will say, CSB says, arguing. Do what you do without arguing. As the writer of Proverbs says, don't answer a fool according to his foolishness, or you'll be like him yourself. Don't get into a dumb argument. Don't get into arguments at all. That's the simple way to always win an argument, is to never start or engage in the argument. And I know that sounds great. You see this a lot on social media right now. People arguing things, and you're going to see it a lot in the next several months as the presidential campaigns and all. And you know what most people do to start an argument? They share a meme, or however it is you say it. You know how many people you've ever convinced with your cute little pictures and pithy sayings? None. None. You don't win arguments by answering a fool according to their folly. You don't win arguments by engaging in dumb discussions. The best way to win an argument is just to not argue. If you want to win an argument, instead of getting into a dispute of words, just display truth. That's the way to win an argument. That's what Peter tells that wife. The way to win your husband is not to argue with him. The way to win him is to just be who you say you are. And when he observes that over time, it will have an impact on him and change him. Take that outside of marriage, the same is true in relationships, just in general. Instead of arguing that you're right, just be right without an argument. And over time, it'll change things. Show respect for the other person's opinion. Never say you're wrong. That doesn't mean you can't have a discussion about truth. What it means is don't approach the discussion with accusation. That's what's being said here. A good name is to be chosen over great wealth, we're told in Proverbs 22. Favor is better than silver and gold. The reason I put that verse up there is because people want to have a good name. They want to have a good reputation. They want to be honored and respected. And when they get into a discussion with somebody where they feel they are not honored or they are not respected, they don't care what you think anymore. They care more about their good name and reputation and even their opinion of themselves than they do about what your opinion is of them. So you're never going to win an argument or win people to God's way of thinking by arguing with them or just saying, you're wrong. And the truth is, we wouldn't want anybody to do that to us, would we? Whatever you want others to do for you, do also the same for them. That's that golden rule that Steve shared with us just yesterday during the presentation. Do you want somebody to approach you and just rudely say, you're wrong? Or do you want them to have respect for your idea, for your ability to think, for your ability to have an answer? Well, then have that same respect for them. Have that same respect for their ability to think and discover and to work through difficult ideas. Next one is, if you're wrong, admit it quickly and emphatically. That is one of the hardest things for most people to say. There's actually two things. One is, I am wrong. That's actually not the hardest. You know what the hardest thing they have discovered for people to say is? No. People would rather make up the wrong answer and be proven wrong than be proven ignorant. They have done study after adult and children that proves this to be true. And the reason is we have a problem in our culture, in our world, in our nature with humility. You know, respect from people more than any other quality in a person? Humility. Humility. I'm not saying we necessarily choose the most humble man to be president. We don't. I'm not saying that we prove that those are the men that we often look to run an organization, but it's the humble man you go to when you need advice about life. It's the humble man you go to when you're trying to figure out how to handle a difficult situation. Because we do respect humility. When somebody is willing to be proven wrong and admit that they are wrong, and admit it openly, we respect that. Years ago, we were a part of a congregation, and one of the elders got up one day. And that elder had tears running down his face. And he got up before that entire congregation, confessed some sins that he had been struggling with in his life. You know, before that moment, I respected him because he was an elder. But in that moment, I learned to respect him because he was a Christian. And I heard that same comment from so many members over the next couple of months after that man was willing to get up and quickly and emphatically admit that he had been wrong about something. Because that kind of humility is just rare. Proverbs 28, verse 13, the one who conceals his sin will not prosper, but whoever confesses and renounces them will find mercy. Pride comes before destruction, we're told in Proverbs 16. And an arrogant spirit before the fall. We of all people, because we belong to God, who is the greatest example of humility, even with power, we should be humble. Because we don't have his power. And we have plenty of reasons to be humble. Begin in a friendly way. You want to win somebody over to God's way of thinking, you need to approach them with kindness as friends. Whoever promotes love, but whoever gossip about it separates friends. The idea there is that whoever is willing to keep secret things secret, whoever is willing to keep appropriate things in their appropriate places. That means in a conversation, whenever you're dealing with somebody and you have information about that person, you don't reveal it to others. You don't just kind of ignore, throw them out because they aren't worthy of your respect. You treat them as a friend, as an equal. Oil and incense bring joy to the heart, and the sweetness of a friend is better than self-counsel. The idea there is that we appreciate friendship. We appreciate kindness. We appreciate people who bring joy into our lives. You want to win people over to God's way of thinking, you have to provide for them the joy that comes from belonging to God. Only then will they care about God's way of thinking. Get the other person saying yes, yes, immediately. Now, again, that sounds manipulative. It won't once we look at the next one. The verses here, a person takes joy in giving an answer in a timely word. How good is that? The idea of an appropriate answer, good thing. Finally, all of you be like-minded and sympathetic. Love one another and be compassionate and humble. That idea of being agreeable with someone and helping them be agreeable with you is the way friendships and relationships are built. That doesn't mean get them saying yes, yes to the wrong thing. We're not salespeople. We don't greasily slick our hair back and get out there and convince people they need stuff they don't need. We are trying to win them to God's way of thinking, which they most definitely need. And the way to do that is to help them see the value of it. Help them see that they should be saying yes, yes to what it is you are offering them. And then let the other people do a great deal of talking. A fool's way is right in his own eyes, but whoever listens to counsel is wise. Keep reading with me. The one who gives an answer before he listens, this is foolishness and disgrace for him. And we all know James 1:19, right? Be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to anger. The idea that we should be listeners first is absolutely a biblical idea. It's the basis of relationship. There's not a single counselor you can go to in the world who won't say the number one problem in marriages and the number one fix for marriages is life talking. Communication. Communication, the key. You know what the key to being a good communicator is? It's not good talking. It's good listening. It's listening. It's being able to listen to others. Just this past Monday, I was on a podcast, a Christian podcast, and we were talking about James 1:19 and what it means to be quick to listen and slow to speak and slow to anger, because essentially the podcast was about how to deal with anger. And I told them on the podcast a trick that my dad started doing years ago. My dad and I had a very strained relationship for a lot of my younger years. And it was because, well, mostly it was with me, I was a jerk. But there was also the aspect of the fact that my dad wasn't a good listener. And so my dad got advice from someone, and I can't remember who it was, but the advice was, whenever you need to talk to Adam about something he's done, some punishment, some deal, take a banana with you and slowly eat the banana for the first 5-10 minutes of y'all's conversation. And remember, as long as there's banana in your mouth, you're not to be talking, you're to be listening. So I say unequivocally, a banana saved my dad's relationship with me. He ate a lot of bananas, I'm just saying, because of me. We got to learn to listen to people. We got to learn to listen to what their concerns are, listen to what it is they disagree with, listen to what it is they don't understand. Most people aren't agreeable to truths that are in the Bible because they don't like the truth. It's because they might not make sense to them. It's because they might not have had the foundation built as to believe in God in the first place. There's going to be something that if we would just listen, we would hear the reason why, and that's where we should be talking. Because again, we're trying to help them understand God's way of thinking. And that begins with listening. Let the other person feel that the idea is his or hers. Again, that sounds manipulative, but it's not. That is the natural progress of being a good listener. Because the goal is solutions, not me getting my way, my personal idea, what I think should happen. How often is it that Jesus did this very thing? Somebody would come and they would propose a question to Jesus. What would he respond with? Question. Because he would want them to come to the right conclusion. He didn't want to give them the answer. He wanted them to see the answer for themselves. And that's the principle here. The desire of the righteous turns out well, but the hope of the wicked leads to wrath. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or conceit, but in humility consider others as more important than yourself. If you do that, if you desire righteous things, those conversations will turn out well. The reason most of those conversations don't turn out well is because we're not desiring righteousness, we're desiring being right. Do you see the difference? My first preaching job was in a small congregation in Wauchula where Tiffany had grown up. And there was a man who worshiped with us there, who's gone now, but his name was Jim Sellers. And Jim Sellers was a pill. He's an interesting fellow. He had been a preacher for many, many years, had decided he was no longer going to preach, had become a jeweler in town and a real estate agent, and he was hard to deal with. And as an example, what he would do is he would take this bulletin that I put out every single week. I'd only find every single typo in the bulletin, which in and of itself would have taken a while because there were a lot. He would take copious notes on every sermon I preached, and then after the service, he would wait until most everybody was gone, but then he'd pull me over to the side and he would tell me everything I said wrong, every verse I misused out of context, every verse I could have used instead of the verses that I used, what I could have said better. I mean, it was a 10 to 15 minute long conversation, criticism, and it was not done pleasantly. Every single sermon. He couldn't stand my preaching. I was there for 8 years. He died, I think, the last year we were there. By year 4 or 5, he became my biggest cheerleader. The reason he became my biggest cheerleader is because he was one of those men who was willing to criticize very freely. But he was also one of those men who was disregarded by nearly everybody because of the way he handled people. People don't like being criticized. I've found that out. He was one of those men that when other preachers were there and he would start bringing up ideas, and he would bring up off the wall, out of left field ideas just for no other reason than to get people thinking. But they would shut him down or not call on him because of his reputation. And I was one of those naive preachers that would call on him every single time. And what was interesting, I found out with Jim that if you let him start talking, and then you would start asking him questions about what he was saying, he would go from all the way out in left field all the way back around to where the truth was. He would argue himself back into the truth. And there was no better way to win Jim's favor than to let him believe that that was his idea. We need to do that with people. We need to let them walk through their process while listening and conversing and talking through it, and maybe helping them with a verse here or a verse there, but let them walk through that process and quit telling people what to think. Let God tell them what to think. And we'll get somewhere with people. We need to try to honestly view things from the other person's point of view. Rejoice with those who rejoice and weep with those who weep. What does that mean? But walk with people through what they're walking through. Isn't that what that means? I love the way it's worded over in 1 Corinthians chapter 12. So that there would be no division in the body, but that the members would have the same concern for one another. So if one member suffers, all the members suffer with it. And if one of the members is honored, all of the members are honored with it. That's the idea of, you know what, if we just see that somebody is suffering, we all suffer with that person because we're all the same body. And if we carry one another's burdens in that way, and we walk together with people through the things that they're walking through, and we walk with them through the thought processes that they're struggling with, we'll be able to help people see things God's way. We need to be sympathetic with the other person's ideas and desires. There's a lot of verses about that in the New Testament, a lot. The idea of doing nothing out of selfish ambition or conceit, but consider others as more important than yourself. The writer of Hebrews says, remember those in prison as though you were in prison with them. That same idea of walking with somebody, walking with them through their struggle. 1 Corinthians chapter 9 is that long passage about be all things to all people. To the Jews, he became as a Jew. To the Gentile, he became as a Gentile. Why did he do that? So that he might win some to God's way of thinking. Well, you only do that by being sympathetic with a person, by walking with that person. Ephesians 1, verse 18 through 19 says, I pray that the eyes of your heart may be enlightened so that you may know what is the hope of his calling, what is the wealth of his glorious inheritance in the saints, and what is the immeasurable greatness of his power toward us who believe, according to the mighty working of his strength. You know what Paul's doing here and does in many passages of Scripture? You see this in almost every letter Paul writes. He opens up with this appeal to them to be the people they are supposed to be. He appeals to their nobler motives. He says, this is who we know we're supposed to be. So I appeal, I pray, I thank God that you are these people. We should be building people up that way. Be easy to understand. I've learned that there's no easier way to be understood when you're trying to win people to God's way of thinking than to word things the way God words them. That's the simple way. 1 Peter chapter 4, verse 11 talks about speak as one who speaks God's words. If I want people to be convinced that God's right, I'm not going to do that through my own way of thinking. I'm going to do that by sharing God's words with them. That's one reason I point out to you so often, if you ever get the opportunity to sit down and study with somebody, instead of telling people what the Bible says, instead of standing at the ball field and telling people what you believe, instead of sitting in an office or at a restaurant table telling people what it is you believe, create an opportunity to show them what God says. There is nothing that shuts down doors quicker in conversations with people, whether you are or you're trying to share with them what God says, whatever it is, whatever the occasion is, there's nothing that shuts it down more than creating an atmosphere of you versus me. Well, this is what I think. What do you think? All that does is create a wall between two people. Whereas if what we do is we say, it really doesn't matter what I think. It really doesn't matter what my opinion is or my interpretation is. What matters is what it says over in 1 Peter chapter 4, verse 11. When that's the way we do it, we show people what we mean by showing them the words of God himself, then we get somewhere. And I don't mean that, and I know it's easy for us to interpret this in terms of evangelism. Please think beyond that. When you're having a conversation with somebody about the upcoming election, instead of saying my opinion, instead of saying the article I read, what you need to do is say, hey, here is why I say what I say, and I show them the Scripture. That's what really makes a difference. I wish Christians, instead of filling up Facebook and Instagram and Twitter and whatever the new, Snapchat and all these other ones are. I wish what we would do is spend our time, instead of articles from human and quotes from human, let's just start sharing verses. That's it. God's word will get further with those people than anything else we can share. Share verses. And then lastly, throw down a challenge. You want to win people to God's way of thinking, you need to throw down a challenge. This is, again, exactly what Paul does and is an example of over and over and over again through Scripture. Colossians 1, verses 9 to 11, he kind of throws down the gauntlet there to those people. He says, for this reason also, since the day we heard it, we haven't stopped praying for you. We are asking that you may be filled with the knowledge of his will and all wisdom and spiritual understanding, so that you may walk worthy of the Lord, fully pleasing to him. And he goes on to explain what that looks like. Ephesians 4, verse 1, therefore I, the prisoner of the Lord, urge you to walk worthy of the calling you have received. This, in business terms, is the concept of laying down a call to action. The idea of giving people what they need in order to take their next step. Now, the best way to do that is to put it in God's words, as we just talked about. You really want to win people to God's way of thinking. What you have to do is start challenging people to live God's way. And when they see that in your life, that you're doing that very thing, that you are actually doing the things that you're talking about and sharing those things with others, then you will win those people. You will be able to share with them what it is God intends for us to be. Now, that was kind of a lightning round of information. I realize that. But here's what I want you to notice. There was a common theme as you went through those. And it was the very same theme that we talked about last week, which is based off Philippians chapter 2, verses 1 through 4. Giving to others what they need. Being focused on them, focused on helping them, not proving yourself right, not preserving your own reputation, not focused on self, but focused on helping them. If that's somebody you're in conflict with about the modern pandemic and how this should be handled, put them first. It's that simple. If it's somebody you're trying to share the gospel with, put them first. If it's a marriage that's strained, put your spouse first. If it's children that you're struggling with, put your children first. Because again, it comes back to those two main principles, doesn't it? Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. So you want to bring people to realize how good and awesome our God is? You do that by showing them the kind of character God produces in his people, by putting them first. If you're not a child of God, I can share with you 1,000 reasons to become one. I'm not going to in a sermon because it was hard enough to get through 12 points. 1,000 seems ridiculous. But I mean, there's 10,000 reasons we should become Christians. That we should glorify God. That we should realize he is the God to serve. And I encourage you, if you're not a Christian, come talk with me after. I'm not going to invite you forward today. I'm going to invite you to come talk to me afterwards and say, hey, I don't need 10,000. I don't need 1,000. Just give me 5. 5 good reasons. I'll show you the reasons. He's a good God, and he's worth serving. I will invite my brothers and sisters, though, to come forward if they're struggling with something, if they have a need, if they need answers, if they need help, if they need prayers, if they need guidance. come forward, because we got 5 elders here and a whole room full of brothers and sisters who want to help you, who want to pray with you and for you, and who want to help you be right with God. If you've got a sin you're struggling with, we want you to handle it today by laying it at God's feet so that God can forgive and you can move forward. If you need the invitation to get your life right, please come forward as we stand and sing this song.